Is it moving, the slide? Friends, is it moving?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, so good afternoon. I know that you are tired and this is a very bad time, but I'll try to do as much as possible. So mainly we are going for a large intestine here, but some of the things are clinical application. This is the lecture where some clinical applications are there. One is volvulus. In the volvulus, we also discuss about diverticulosis, and then there is another. It happens in children. Dilatation of the large intestine, megacolon, Hirschsprung disease. These are the two clinical applications. Rest is all about gross anatomy of the large intestine. Now, here you can see all the parts of large intestine. So first of all, the first part is appendix here, but before appendix, actually, the very first part is cecum. The large intestine actually start with cecum, and cecum is very prominent because its transverse diameter is more than the vertical diameter. And then goes ascending colon. Here appendix is hanging here. So somewhere here ileum will join. Then right colic flexor is over here, transverse colon. Left colic flexor over here, descending colon. This part is sigmoid colon and it continues with rectum and anal canal. So what you see here is that the main feature which is distinguishing it from the small intestine is this one. This thickened band which is coming from the cecum, then going across all along. Only in two places you do not get it. One is rectum, you do not get rectum any Tinea coli, and one is appendix. So except rectum and appendix, all along we get a thickened longitudinal muscle layer. It is not actually one. There is one here, another over here, and another over here. So anterior, anteromedial, and posteromedial. So these three longitudinal muscle band, Tinea coli, actually envelop 1.5 meter. You know that small intestine is 6 meter. This one is 1.5 meter. So 1.5 meter is enveloped by a shorter Tinea coli. So in between, these get dilated. So these dilatations are called hostrations. And apart from that, we can also get some fat-filled sac like this. These are called appendices epiploicy. So Tinea coli, hostration, these are hostration, this dilatation, and appendices epiploicy, this fat-filled bag. These are the three main features by which we can distinguish the large intestine. But I want to mention here that cecum as a part of junction between small and large intestine has got a very important role. Means sometimes in ACQ they can ask that. There are two main type of obstruction we see clinically in patients. Small intestinal obstruction. What is obstruction? Means the peristalsis is stopped and either the food or the fecal matter doesn't move. So small intestinal obstruction, no food is coming into the cecum. So cecum will be empty. Large intestinal obstruction, here there are no movement. As there are no movement here, cecum is full. So if it is asked that by observing cecum radiologically, how you differentiate between small intestinal obstruction and large intestinal obstruction? Answer: small intestinal obstruction As no food is coming into the cecum, cecum is empty radiologically. In the large intestinal obstruction, as no food is, fecal matter is not going away from the cecum is full. That is why cecum and this region, ileocecal region, clinically is very, very important. Now, when you look at barium, what is barium? Barium is actually a contrast material. That means enema means you put it in an injectable form through the anus, and by pressure it will go up. And swallow or barium meal means the patient actually swallow it through the mouth. So in barium enema here, the barium is actually gone from the large intestine and here going into small intestine. So in barium enema, small and large, you can see left side, right side, quite distinctive. In case of small intestine, we can see flowery appearance. And this flowery appearance, snowflake appearance, is because of circular mucus fold in the jejunum and ileum, small intestine. But the large intestine is peculiar. You see that first of all, you should also note the diameters. There is a nomenclature which is usually told to the clinical student. This is called 3, 6, 9. That means if you are radiologically looking at pictures and trying to locate whether dilatation is there or not, obstruction causes dilatation. So obstruction is there or not. If it is less than 3 centimeter, that means it is okay regarding small intestine. If it is less than 6 in centimeter in case of large intestine, then it is okay. And if it is less than 9 centimeter in cecum, then it is okay. That means whether obstruction happen, whether dilatation happen, radiologically a doctor can look at this formula of 3, 6, 9. Normally, small intestine luminal diameter should be less than 3 centimeter, large intestine less than 6 centimeter, cecum less than 9 centimeter. Now, why large intestine shows this type of pattern? Because this is clinically called mottled, M-O-T-T-L-E-D. Mottled means there are stool, fecal matter, and this fecal matter actually is acted upon by coliform organism. It produces a lot of gas. So gas and fecal matter together gives a peculiar appearance. This black shadow is actually gaseous shadow of mottled haustral pattern of the large intestine. So you can see here the transverse colon. This is right colic flexure, this is left colic flexure, and this is descending colon. In case of diseases like ulcerative colitis and all, the appearance will not be such. The haustration will be totally absent, and the diameter of the large intestine will increase. So two characteristic feature of ulcerative colitis is that haustration pattern is lost, and there is dilatation of the permanent dilatation of the usually descending colon. Now, as far as the length is concerned, the largest one is naturally transverse colon. Why does it matter? And this is also sigmoid colon. Means if longer time fecal matter has to remain, it requires more movement, and requiring more movement, both this thing requires some additional thing, and that is called mesocolon. So mesocolon is apparatus mainly for mobility of a large part of the gut. So transverse mesocolon help movement of transverse colon. Sigmoid mesocolon helps in movement of sigmoid colon. But cecum does not have any mesentery. Appendix has, but ascending colon does not have any mesentery. Descending colon does not have any mesentery. Rectum anal canal does not have any mesentery. So the the size only helps us to locate that if the size is more to mobilize, you require mesentery and it forms mesocolon. If you see the lengthwise also here, cecum, I told you width is more, appendix is around 2 to 25, but it depends. Ascending colon, descending colon, almost similar, but descending colon is more longer. Rectum is straight, 12 centimeters. So we already noted that for MCQ purpose and etc. also that appendix does not contain any tinea coli, rectum does not contain any tinea coli, anal canal also. Okay, and one of the important thing here that we will later on see that from the cecum until the right 2/3 of the transverse colon comes under embryonic midgut, and left 1/3 of transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, rectum, anal canal comes under hindgut. If you look at now the peritoneum, so peritoneum I already told you that if you look at the feature of sigmoid colon, so this is the mesentery which is enveloping the whole of the sigmoid colon, forming sigmoid mesocolon. Similarly, transverse colon, it is enveloping the whole and forming transverse mesocolon, connecting it with the anterior border of the pancreas. But two important part, ascending colon and descending colon, you can see that there are no mesentery. So one of the important part you must remember that some of the structures in the abdomen are retroperitoneal. So you can see here that here the part of the ascending and descending colon become retroperitoneal because the peritoneum covers like this anterior surface and then go from the right to the left or left to the right. So posterior part become retroperitoneal or non-peritoneal. Same with the descending colon. But cecum is one of the organ which is fully covered with peritoneum, unlike the ascending colon and descending colon. Similarly, rectum, if you can see, upper part of the rectum is peritoneal, but lower part is not wholly peritoneal. What does it mean? Why we are discussing this? I mean, we all know that in IMU mostly we discuss those parts which are clinically relevant. Remember that peritoneum, if it is there, naturally it is helpful because peritoneum has got macrophage, peritoneum has got protective apparatus, and so naturally those parts which are not covered with peritoneum, they are more susceptible to infection or more susceptible to even spread of neoplasm. Now this part is not you will not get this compartmentalization in normal patient. What I mean is that this total component rarely you will get in anatomy books because this is discussed in surgical books, because peritoneal compartmentalization happens when there are accumulation of some liquid or fluid inside the peritoneal cavity, and you all know that liquid or fluid happens mostly in post-operative period or if there is any intraperitoneal trauma or injury. So we divide this compartment from here. Why? Because this is stomach, and in front of the stomach transverse colon goes here, and the transverse colon forms transverse mesocolon, correct? So we divide the compartments above the transverse colon or below the transverse colon, supracolic compartment and infracolic compartment. So we start first with supracolic. So in the supracolic, here is diaphragm. So between the diaphragm and the right lobe of the liver, there is a space which is called right subphrenic space. What is phrenic? Phrenic means diaphragm. So beneath the diaphragm, right subphrenic space. So between right lobe of the liver and diaphragm. Similarly, on the left side also, there is a left subphrenic space, left side of the diaphragm and left lobe of the liver. But this is very shallow because there are ligaments over here, very shallow. So the right subphrenic space can be a potential space for accumulation of infection. Now beneath the liver we call subhepatic. So subhepatic means right lobe of the liver and kidney. So this is the space. So between the inferior surface of the right lobe of the liver and the right kidney, there is a potential space which is called hepatorenal pouch of Morrison. This hepatorenal pouch is clinically very, very important. If you have got a operation on the upper part of the abdomen, for example, you may have a gastric ulcer repair operation, you may have a cholecystectomy operation. Most of the fluid in post-operative period will always collect in hepatorenal pouch. Why? Because this is the most dependent part of peritoneal cavity in lying down position. So what you will do? Here posteriorly, this hepatorenal pouch is related to a rib. This is called 12th rib. So if below 12th rib you put a opening, a catheter or something like rubber, and then it will actually take out from the posterior part the whatever collection is there in hepatorenal pouch of Morrison. So very moribund patient, those who are having a lot of postoperative fluid, usually this maneuver is employed below the 12th rib. What about the left side? Left side, between the liver and stomach, there is no gap. So in the left side, we are not calling it as truly subhepatic. We are calling actually beneath the stomach. So in the left side, it is lesser sac, the area which is beneath the stomach. So you can see beneath the stomach, very secluded lesser sac, left subhepatic space, pancreas. This is the transverse colon joining with the pancreas, transverse mesocolon. At the top of the pancreas, splenic artery, spleen. Okay, so all this structure, splenic artery, pancreas, transverse mesocolon, spleen, left kidney, this comes under lesser sac. And we all know lesser sac is usually not approachable. So anything which collect in the lesser sac, it is causing a concern for the surgeon because it is not very easy to reach lesser sac. So here this picture is very nice and it can show that where in the peritoneal cavity fluid can accumulate. So if the person is lying like this, naturally, I told you hepatorenal pouch of Morrison. So this is an ultrasonography to see between the liver and the kidney, free fluid is accumulated. But suppose this person is mobile. In case of mobility, this fluid is actually going down. Going down where? Going down into pelvic cavity. And in the pelvic cavity, between rectum and uterus, there is a pouch called recto-uterine pouch of Douglas. So in the recto-uterine pouch, it will accumulate. So in case of female, recto-uterine pouch of Douglas is also dependent part, but the person should not be actually lying down. Person should be mobile. And in case of male, it is rectovesical pouch. So we all understand now in normal supine position, bedridden position, the fluid will collect in hepatorenal pouch of Morrison. In mobile part, it is either rectouterine or rectovesical. And naturally, from here, if you go to the previous picture, if it is collect here between the right lobe of the liver and kidney here, it may enter into the lesser sac also. Why? Because behind this part there is a, remember in the previous lecture I told you there is a opening here, and this is called epiploic foramen. So through epiploic foramen, the fluid actually can enter from hepatorenal pouch into the lesser sac. Now we will go to below transverse colon. So this is transverse colon. Below transverse colon, where can fluid go? In this aspect, you must remain assured that no fluid will go to left side. Why? This is descending colon. This is left paracolic gutter. So between the abdominal wall and descending colon is left paracolic gutter. This is left infracolic space. But fluid cannot go from supracolic to infracolic here because this one is tightly adherent with the diaphragm, phrenico-colic ligament. And then also stomach is there, gastrosplenic ligament, etc. So fluid can never go here. So fluid will always come here. What is this? This is ascending colon. Between ascending colon and abdominal wall, this is right paracolic gutter. And through the right paracolic gutter, the fluid will come. Where it will go? It will go to the pelvic cavity if the person is moving. So right paracolic gutter is the principal spread of infection or fluid from supracholic to infracholic. And next we will come to the ileocecal region. So if you are to discuss in suppose you are in 6th semester or 7th semester in clinical school Seremban, and they ask you that, okay, give a seminar on ileocecal region and its surgical anatomy. Mostly students project this single picture, because this single picture you can describe most of the important surgical anatomical aspect. So what we see here is that the cecum is there, and I already told cecum is more wide than its vertical length, and it is lying where? In the right iliac fossa, and beneath the cecum lies a muscle called psoas major. There is also a nerve, femoral nerve, and lower part of the femur actually, lower part of this femoral nerve and psoas major. Here actually pelvic cavity start, and towards the left side of the cecum joins the ileum. So ileocecal sphincter, anatomical sphincter, and this anatomical sphincter is very unique. It allows food to go from ileum to the cecum, but never allows any regurgitation of the food from the cecum to the ileum. Why? Because ileum is small intestine. Small intestine has no bacteria. It is sterile, but large intestine is full of coliform bacteria. So if I allow fluid or gas or anything to move from cecum to ileum, then naturally it will produce infection. So ileocecal sphincter only allow flow from ileum to cecum, does not allow in a reverse way. And 2 centimeter below the ileocecal opening, you can see appendix is dangling, and appendix is connected to the ileum by a fold. This is called mesoappendix. And further, if we see that what are the other things here? Between the ascending colon, ileum and cecum, this is called superior ileocecal recess of peritoneum. That means this is all peritoneum, but this has given a special name, superior ileocecal recess. Between ileum and appendix, this part is called inferior ileocecal recess. Now, when we try to trace the appendix, sometimes appendix is hidden behind the cecum. So it is not in this position, behind the cecum. So when you open, you cannot see any appendix. Like here, you cannot see actually any appendix. So how you will trace the appendix? You follow the tinea coli. You follow the tinea coli. Where the tinea coli ends, that is the beginning point for appendix. So 3 tinea coli, they converge at the base of the appendix, is a guide for appendix. And now we are to discuss about securing the artery, because as I told you that sometimes they ask about surgical part. Surgical part means what? When you try to do appendicectomy, you remove appendix, how you will proceed. Now, we can see here many blood vessels. One of the thing is ileocolic artery. Ileocolic artery is the terminal branch of superior mesentery, and this ileocolic artery give here anterior cecal, posterior cecal. It can give also appendicular artery. You can see appendicular artery, correct? So if I want to ligate appendicular artery with a aim to do appendicectomy, where I will put my scalpel? Here or here? Answer is no. You cannot put here. Superior ileocecal recess is full of blood vessel. So any instrument, you should not put it there. So where you should start? You should start with inferior ileocecal recess. Reason? It does not have too many artery, only one artery, appendicular artery. So inferior ileocecal recess is also called bloodless fold, because it allow without any loss of blood, you can do appendicectomy if you approach inferior ileocecal recess. In this aspect, I want to also add one thing. Sometimes you feel pain over the right iliac fossa. You go for McBurney's point is, but don't forget that you have to also ask the patient to flex the hip. Why? Psoas major. because usually between the cecum and psoas major, retrocecal position appendix is lying. So whenever you ask the patient to flex the hip, flex the thigh, psoas major moves, and this tight psoas major, between tight psoas major and cecum, the inflamed appendix produce severe pain and the patient jumps in pain. This is called psoas test. So asking the patient to flex the thigh, if the pain is increased, it indicates that a retrocecal appendix lying over psoas major. Now the blood supply of the cecum, I already told, ileocolic artery is the terminal branch of superior mesenteric. It gives anterior cecal, it gives posterior cecal, and anterior cecal, posterior cecal both supply cecum, but posterior cecal sometimes give appendicular artery. Veins, same ileocolic vein, superior mesenteric vein, portal vein, and lymph node will be mostly in ileocolic node. Coming to the localization of the appendix. So you see here that this is the ileocecal sphincter. So this is the upper lip of the ileocecal sphincter. This is the lower lip of ileocecal sphincter. If I draw a line over here, that demarcate that above this line is ascending colon. That means upper lip of ileocecal sphincter, and from lower lip down is the cecum. And within cecum, 2 centimeter below the ileocecal sphincter is the opening of appendix. And this opening of appendix actually is guarded by a valve, but not most of you are above 20, I think. So you don't have this valve. This valve is mostly found in, I think, within 15 years something. That means usually in adolescent we get this valve. Later on in adulthood this valve disappear. So from that actually appendicular orifice start, and this is a mesoappendix. So remember again the normal location of the appendix 2 centimeter below the posteromedial wall of the cecum. It is dangling and mostly it is retrocecal. So one of the important thing in ileocecal junction is non-invasive investigation. 1000 you can tell the gold standard for diagnostic approach to lower GI disorder is colonoscopy. So you put colonoscope instrument through the anus, rectum, it go to sigmoid colon, then it go to descending colon, then it go to left colic flexor, transverse colon, right colic flexor, ascending colon, and once you reach the cecum, you can demarcate the ileocecal junction. So ileocecal junction you reach means you already know that now your colonoscopy is completed. You can see so many structure, colonic polyp and other whatever pathologist has told you, whatever things you have to see on the mucosa, which will help in the diagnosis of lower GI disorder. Now coming to appendix, you can see this picture that appendix is a very variable. Even a surgeon who have already dissected 50 appendix, on the 51st appendix also he is worried whether I will now go and I will not find or do not find, I do not know. Why? Because you see that the position of the appendix so much variable. Nearly 65 to 70% is actually like this. So it is vertically situated just behind the cecum, hidden behind the cecum, retrocecal. Rest 28 to 30% is dangling below the cecum, subcecal. And this subcecal is very dangerous. Why? Because it go to pelvic cavity, it can touch the uterine tube, ovary. So differential diagnosis of subcecal appendicitis may be even ruptured ectopic gestation in the uterine tube or even ovarian pathology. So subcecal is always pelvic. Then other two are very important, and that is one in front of the ileum, another behind the ileum, pre-ileal and post-ileal. But out of this, one is requiring attention to you. What is that? Pre-ileal, because in front of appendix is the dangling below is your greater omentum. Greater omentum is peritoneum, correct? So if pre-ileal appendix is inflamed and tip of it touch the greater omentum, infection will spread from appendix to peritoneum, peritonitis. So pre-ileal is very susceptible to get very easily the acute peritonitis. So normally you have noted the length around 9 centimeter, but naturally appendicitis it will be 25 centimeter. Diameter is usually 6 to 7 millimeter, not centimeter, millimeter. Compared to small gut, large gut, I already told you formula of 3, formula 6, formula 9. Here that is all centimeter, but in case of appendix, millimeter. So usually in right iliac fossa, if left-sided, it is called situs inversus. Situs inversus is what? It is an congenital abnormality. The heart, instead of left side, it will lie on the right side. Appendix, instead of right iliac fossa, it will lie in the left iliac fossa. Liver, instead of right hypochondrium, it will lie in the left hypochondrium. So this is called situs inversus. So tinea I already told, and particularly we get appendicitis in childhood mainly because of two reasons. There are a lot of lymphoid follicle in first decade of life until 10 years, and also it is very long and lumen is wide. So fecal matter very quickly enter the appendix and block it. These are the two reasons why we get appendicitis more common between 8 to 13 years, and particularly in children. And mesoappendix is very important. We have already seen it is carrying the appendicular artery. So here we already noted that there is a diagnostic importance of appendicitis in clinical skills, particularly your OSCE. So they will start giving a patient 13-year-old female complaining of nausea, a slight fever, vomiting, presents and pain is over the right lower abdomen. So you have to locate. So location is McBurney's point. So where it is, you draw a line from the umbilicus to anterior superior. So this is iliac crest. So in front of iliac crest is anterior superior iliac spine. So between this distance, medial 2/3 and lateral 1/3. So this time it is more and this one less. This is 2/3 and this is 1/3. The junction point is the maximum point of tenderness of base of appendix. Let us look at now the appendicular artery. So if you see here, this is ileocholic artery. This ileocholic artery here giving anterior cecal artery. Here it is giving the posterior cecal artery, correct? But apart from giving anterior cecal and posterior cecal, most of the cases it gives directly appendicular artery, which comes behind the ileum through the mesoappendix. It supply the appendix. But one of the important thing you must note, although the whole of the artery is lying in mesoappendix, this mesoappendix, but the terminal part of the artery has no mesoappendix. It is touching directly the appendix. This is very dangerous. If appendix is inflamed and this inflammation travel to the appendicular artery at the distal part, appendicular artery by infection will be thrombosed, and thrombosis of appendicular artery will give rise to appendicular gangrene. Gangrene will develop, degenerate. So this part is quite important to note. Appendicular artery is a branch of ileocholic artery. It gets thrombosed in the terminal part and it can produce gangrene of the appendix. So again, ileocholic artery give appendicular artery, or even it can come from posterior cecal artery. Veins, superior mesenteric vein, portal vein. Now, something about appendicular pain. We already told that pain of the appendix is in the McBurney's point, but I will further describe it that suppose 1st December 9 o'clock you have appendicitis attack. 1st December 9 o'clock, will you feel pain over the McBurney's point? No. Usually McBurney's point tenderness happens 24 to 48 hours after the starting of appendicitis. That means what? There are two types of peritoneum, parietal peritoneum, visceral peritoneum. When you get appendicitis at the very beginning, the sympathetic nerve which is supplying the visceral peritoneum gets stretched. What is that sympathetic nerve? Lesser splanchnic nerve. From which spinal segment does it come? T10. And this T10 also supply umbilicus. So when I have got initial attack of acute appendicitis involving visceral peritoneum, I will not feel pain in the McBurney. I will feel pain over the umbilicus. Reason? Pain carrying fiber are sympathetic fiber, lesser splanchnic nerve, spinal segment T10. The same nerve also supply umbilicus, so we get referred pain over umbilicus. So when actually McBurney's point will be tender? After the disease process goes on, and now the parietal peritoneum overlying appendix gets stretched, muscles get stretched by the because nerve supply of the parietal peritoneum and nerve supply of the muscles are same, the intercostal nerve. So that in that case only we will get the McBurney's point tender. So you can see here the picture shows the this is the mucosa. These are the simple columnar epithelium, and we can get a lot of invagination and all. And then in the submucosa, we can get a large lymphoid nodule, and that is why it is also called abdominal tonsil. And this is how the fecalith actually enter, because early childhood and adolescent, this is quite open. The fecalith goes there and then it obstructs. So remember that when the pain begins, it should be always in the periumbilical region, and later on only it will localize over the right iliac fossa over the McBurney's point. Student, can any student read this? Can any student read this question?
Sure, doctor. A 14-year-old girl complains of pain in the right iliac fossa. She also complains of fever and vomiting. The physician suspects it as a case of acute appendicitis. A medical student was asked to find out the maximum point of tenderness, which is the point on which a student will palpate.
Which one is the correct answer? Look at this. Okay. A, B, C or D? So can you tell me which one is the correct answer?
C.
C is the correct answer. Okay, next one.
E.
What I told here? Oh, what is the answer for this? Location of pain?
D.
D, correct. Okay, so in case of examination, it can actually come in the first professional exam that if the case is lower abdominal pain, they can ask you, give the anatomical basis of referred pain to the umbilicus in case of acute appendicitis. So the rationale is written here, so you have to explain that way. Now coming to the colon, there are three part here: ascending, descending, and transverse, correct? But don't forget that two important conical structures are there. Right colic flexor, which is just related to the liver. So suppose you have a patient of colonic carcinoma is quite common in this region of the world. So colonic carcinoma involving right colic flexor, which organ will be mainly affected? Right lobe of the liver. And remember, this part all is from the midgut. Similarly, left colic flexor is related to the spleen. And left colic flexor, one of the important thing is that left colic flexure most commonly attacked by ischemia. Why? There is an artery over here, over this part, which is called superior mesenteric artery. There is an artery over here, which is called inferior mesenteric artery. Superior mesenteric artery is the artery of midgut. Inferior mesenteric artery is the artery of hindgut. So as these two arteries are developmental arteries, due to any developmental defect, if the junctional point of this two arterial system has got problem since birth, you always have your splenic flexure weak. So embryologically, splenic flexure is the junctional point, so it is always attacked by ischemic process, less blood supply. So no doubt from the splenic flexure, that means left 1/3 of transverse colon, splenic flexure of left colic flexure, descending colon, sigmoid colon, these are all hindgut. These are all hindgut. So hindgut starts from left 1/3 transverse colon and then downward. Whereas remaining this, including small intestine, all are midgut. Now ascending colon is over the right part and left part. The main important thing in ascending colon is that it is going from ileocecal region to liver, and main important organ which can be affected in colonic carcinoma, etc. is kidney. So right kidney is lying just behind the ascending colon. Similarly, descending colon also, the main structure lying is kidney. So in case of right colic flexure, liver can be affected. In case of left colic flexure, spleen and stomach can be affected. This I am telling about complication of a colonic carcinoma and all, which organ can be affected. So ascending colon, descending colon, more probability that kidney will be affected. Now we'll come to transverse colon. Transverse colon, you all know that this is a junctional region. We tell supracolic compartment, infracolic compartment, transverse mesocolon here, and transverse mesocolon is actually joining with the anterior border of the pancreas. Okay, so what are the structure lying anterior and posterior to the transverse colon? If we look at transverse colon, it is completely interperitoneal. That means mesocolon is completely covering it. So the structure behind is both kidney, right kidney here, left kidney here. And then a very important structure is transverse mesocolon, pancreas, and when the pancreas head is here, second part of the duodenum. So second part of the duodenum, pancreas, right kidney, left kidney, these are all posterior. And in front is only one structure, greater omentum. So in front is greater omentum, but behind both kidney, pancreas and duodenum. So transverse colon, naturally, if it is affected by any disease process, lot of vital organ can be affected. Now we have already talked about barium enema. So here this type of picture can be given even in CA, particularly for identification of some indirectly they ask that which part is this, or some anatomical distinguishing like that. So you should be conversant with barium enema and identify the parts. So ascending colon, right colic flexure, transverse colon, left colic flexure, descending colon, sigmoid colon, and you can see here the sigmoid colon continue with the rectum. But here we cannot see actually the ileocecal region. The main important thing is we want to exclude ulcerative colitis, colonic carcinoma, diverticular disease, colonic polyp. But CT and MRI is there, but I told you that colonoscope is much more beneficial than CT and MRI in exclusion of the disease process. So how you do it? You actually through a syringe, you put barium sulfate through the anal canal, and by pressure it goes up, and you take every 15 minutes one X-ray, another X-ray like that. So because it takes time for reverse process to go barium into different part of the large intestine. Now coming to sigmoid colon plays a very important role in pathological process, from where it is starting and where it is going. Now here is the inlet of the pelvis. That means pelvis actually starts here, and then pelvic cavity is deep inside it. So it starts from the pelvic brim, the inlet of the pelvis, and where does it go? The terminal part is opposite sacral 3 vertebra. So from sacral 3, the rectum start, and it forms a loop. What actually forms the loop? Because from the posterior abdominal wall here to the S-shaped loop, this yellow color structure is there. This yellow color structure is sigmoid mesocolon, and beneath the sigmoid mesocolon, that means if sigmoid mesocolon is like the limb of a V, V means this is one limb of the V and this is another limb of the V. So in the center is the common iliac artery and common iliac vein. So because sigmoid colon is quite long, you already told that transverse colon is the longest and sigmoid colon is the second longest. Particularly people who, African people and all who take a lot of high roughage diet, high fiber diet, lot of time the food is there in sigmoid colon. It causes increased length of the sigmoid colon. If there is increased length of the sigmoid colon, the sigmoid mesocolon get twisted. So twisting of the sigmoid mesocolon and thereby obstruction of the arteries which are going to the sigmoid colon get obstructed. That condition is called volvulus. So volvulus is a disease where due to very long sigmoid colon, there is a rotation in the pedicle, which is formed by the root of the sigmoid mesocolon. So naturally, obstruction will produce lack of blood supply and there will be no peristalsis and the corresponding part of the gut will dilate. Dilatation of the colon is also called megacolon. So the end result is megacolon. Remember, this type of volvulus can happen in cecum, can happen in sigmoid colon, can happen in transverse colon. But in exam, if it is asked what is volvulus and where it is most common, answer is no doubt sigmoid volvulus. So sigmoid volvulus is most common out of all other volvulus. So again, what is volvulus? Mainly the twisting happening through the pedicle of mesocolon because of the long gut. Now there is another point here you must note that we already noted that the large intestine or small intestine has 4 layers. That means the muscularies and then submucosa, then mucosa. Suppose there is a gap between the here in the submucosa here. There is a gap. If there is a gap over here, then the mucosa and submucosa, they go like this. The mucosa and submucosa, they go like a loop and they lie beneath the serosa. Even they go through the gap in the muscles also. So this type of disease where mucosa and submucosa go through a gap in the muscle and protrude beneath the serosa, this is called diverticulitis or diverticulosis. So again to repeat, if there is a gap in the, out of the 4 layer, if there is a gap in the muscle layer, mucosa and submucosa go protrude and run beneath the serous layer, producing diverticulosis. So when you actually do rectal examination in the CSSC or even you do sigmoidoscopy, you must be very careful. Why? Because rectum does not have any mesocolon. Rectum is straight and fixed. Sigmoid colon has a long sigmoid mesocolon. So whenever any part of the gut is fixed and another part is mobile, junction of the fixed and mobile produce a sudden angulation. So there is a sudden angulation between rectosigmoid junction. So anyone doing sigmoidoscopy should be very careful here. So here we can see the obstruction and the proximal part of the sigmoid colon is dilated in barium enema. So this indicate the radiological picture of sigmoid volvulus. So this is also called corkscrew-like variation. And this is a volvulus involving jejunum and ileum. Okay, so mesenteric pedicle becoming very short due to since birth, congenital. So mesenteric pedicle being very short, the midgut volvulus can also happen in early part of the life. Now, coming to the 2 artery here, I already told you that this is celiac trunk coming from upper part of the anterior abdominal aorta. This is superior mesenteric artery and this is inferior mesenteric artery. So there are mainly 3 arteries coming from abdominal aorta. Artery of foregut, artery of midgut, artery of hindgut. Foregut is celiac trunk here. This is superior mesenteric, this is inferior mesenteric. So superior mesenteric, what are the branches it is giving? First branch we have already seen here, correct? The first branch come here and go in the second part of duodenum, inferior pancreatico-duodenal. Then over here it gives jejunum and ileal, jejunal and ileal branch. Then this branch, last branch, going to supply the appendix and cecum, ileocolic artery. Then after ileocolic, this is a right colic artery, and this one, which is supplying over here, is middle colic artery. So middle colic artery is actually supplying the whole of the transverse colon. So the main branches of the superior mesenteric are inferior pancreatico-duodenal, jejunal and ileal, ileocolic, right colic, middle colic. So what are the structures they are supplying? Ileocolic we have already learned, ileum, cecum, appendix. So if we look at the right colic here, this is right colic. It supply mainly the ascending colon and part of right colic plexus. But middle colic supplies whole of the transverse colon. Now, who is now taking part? After this, what will happen? After this is artery of the hindgut. So artery of the hindgut is inferior mesenteric, which is giving first here left colic. So left colic is joining with the middle colic here, and artery of foregut and midgut joining here. So this principally supply the left colic flexor and descending colon. After left colic, this is sigmoidal branch, this is sigmoidal, and last branch over here, which is going to rectum, is superior rectal. So 3 branches of inferior mesenteric, left colic, sigmoidal branch. There are 2 or 3 sigmoidal branch, and then because sigmoid colon is very long, and then last branch is superior rectal. Now, one of the important thing is that many of these arteries can be obstructed because atherosclerosis is one of the reasons, then thrombosis, there are so many causes of vascular thrombosis, you know. But does it mean that it will produce a pathology? No. Why? Why not? The main reason is that all these arteries, they give straight arteries. And these straight arteries on the wall of the gut, they produce another channel. This channel is called marginal artery. So suppose I have got a blockage of right colic artery, but I will not feel any problem. Why? Because the blood which is to be supplied over here will go from the other artery like ileocolic artery, will go through the marginal artery, and through the marginal artery it will supply here. So because of marginal artery anastomosis, the obstruction of the large intestine by vascular thrombosis is quite negligible. I mean, because marginal artery allows free flow anastomotic of different arterial system. So if you can see here, this is the superior mesenteric arterial system. This is ileocolic artery. This is again the right colic artery. This is middle colic artery. This is inferior mesenteric system, left colic artery, sigmoidal artery. This is superior rectal, last branch, and this channel which is helping collateral circulation is marginal artery. Now, one of the important thing, clinical thing, I will state here. Suppose you look at inferior part of pancreas. In front of the third part of the duodenum, you find 2 arteries, superior mesenteric, 1 artery and 1 vein, superior mesenteric artery and superior mesenteric vein. But this superior mesenteric artery is actually arising from abdominal aorta. So between abdominal aorta and superior mesenteric artery, there is a vein. This is called left renal vein. So what will happen is that if this superior mesenteric artery by chance become too large, between superior mesenteric and abdominal aorta, the left renal vein get compressed. This is called nutcracker syndrome. So although it is arterial lesion, it will produce renal manifestation. due to less blood supply, I mean obstruction in the blood supply of left kidney, hematuria, abdominal pain, left testicular pain will happen. So nutcracker syndrome is a very important complication of superior mesenteric artery pathology. So this is inferior mesenteric artery. Inferior mesenteric artery giving here left colic, sigmoid, superior rectal, and arteriography also shows the same branch, left colic, sigmoidal, and superior rectal. Now coming to venous drainage is somewhat different. So the veins from the rectum, first is superior rectal vein. Superior rectal vein forms inferior mesenteric vein. This inferior mesenteric vein joins splenic vein. Splenic vein joins superior mesenteric vein, forms portal vein. So again to repeat, the superior rectal vein forms inferior mesenteric joins splenic and superior mesenteric forms portal vein. So venous drainage is somewhat different. And remember that the main important thing here is the portal vein. So superior mesenteric and splenic vein form portal vein. Where it is formed? Behind the neck of the pancreas. So another important thing is that sometimes in superior mesenteric syndrome, patient may feel pain just after getting diet, because if you get some food, your small intestine moves more, but if superior mesenteric cannot supply blood, naturally there will be pain. So superior mesenteric artery blockage will produce typical pain just after the diet. Not only that, superior mesenteric artery dilatation, here in this picture you can see superior mesenteric artery dilatation can also cause obstruction of the third part of duodenum. Superior mesenteric artery dilatation can also cause obstruction of third part of duodenum. So here you can see the picture. The green color picture denote from here until here is midgut, and the yellow color part is the hindgut. And you can see the differential part of the lymph nodes also. These are inferior mesenteric nodes. These are superior mesenteric nodes. Both superior mesenteric node, inferior mesenteric node go in front of the aorta, produce pre-aortic node or para-aortic node, and ultimately the lymphatic channel here is thoracic duct. So all the nodes ultimately will produce thoracic duct. Thoracic duct will carry the lymphatics towards the upper part in the thorax. Now, I already mentioned it about in the outcome that this is a very important disease of children, congenital. What is happening is that a newborn children complain of dilatation of the large intestine, obstruction, cannot pass the stool, vomiting. So the most common reason here is that you know that there are neural plexus in the wall of the large intestine, and the most common one is the myenteric plexus, submucous plexus. So in this case, what is happening is due to developmental defect, the neural crest which will form the myenteric plexus nerves does not migrate. That means when neural tube is formed in the developing embryo, neural crest always go here and there and produce their differentiated product. But in this case, the neural crest does not migrate, so myenteric plexus doesn't form. So if the nerves at all is not there, naturally they cannot produce peristalsis. So lack of peristalsis, dilatation of the large intestine, congenital megacolon. So congenital megacolon, due to lack of migration of neural crest, no nerve in the myenteric plexus, Hirschsprung disease. The disease name is Hirschsprung disease. Now coming to the nerves now, there are two types of nerve in the intestine, parasympathetic, sympathetic. But parasympathetic, again in this picture you can see there is a clear demarcation. Vagus supplies until where? Until right two-thirds of transverse colon. From your throat, pharynx to right two-thirds of transverse colon is vagus. But what is the alternative of the vagus? Pelvic splanchnic nerve. Pelvic splanchnic nerve is S2, S3 and S4. So pelvic splanchnic nerve S2, S3, S4 supply the left 1/3 of transverse colon, and not only left 1/3 of transverse colon, it supplied descending colon, rectum, and other organs like the genital organs, urinary bladder. So urinary bladder also is supplied by pelvic splanchnic nerve. So for the lower part of our body, lower abdomen and pelvis, there is another parasympathetic nerve. The name of the nerve is pelvic splanchnic nerve. Coming to the sympathetic in our body is divided in the abdomen into three parts. We already noted that greater splanchnic nerve, lesser splanchnic nerve, and least splanchnic nerve, and they carry the pain. So first of all is greater splanchnic nerve, which is mainly coming to T5 to T9. That is why any pain in the supplied organs, stomach, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, will be in the epigastric region, because epigastric region is supplied by T5 to T9. Now, after that comes small intestine, ascending colon, transverse colon. They are supplied by a nerve called lesser splanchnic nerve. The spinal segment is T10 and T11. So because of T10 and T11, the pain here will be referred to umbilicus. So what are the part? Duodenum, jejunum, colon, until left 1/3 of transverse colon. The last part, which last part? The splenic flexure, descending colon, sigmoid colon. This part is supplied by last nerve, least splanchnic nerve, T12 and L1. As this is T12 and L1, any pain from the descending colon and sigmoid colon will be referred in suprapubic region or over the inguinal ligament. Suprapubic region or inguinal region, because the nerves here are T12 and L1. So it depends, remember, on which spinal segment it is coming. So in the exam, if they come write down, a patient has come with the epigastric pain, okay, and later on in diagnosis is found having gastritis, give the anatomical reason. You will just write two sentences. Sympathetic nerve of the stomach is greater splanchnic nerve. Greater splanchnic nerve carries pain from the stomach. The spinal segment of greater splanchnic nerve is T5 to T9. The same spinal segment also supply the skin between xiphoid process and umbilicus, T5 to T9. That is why the pain of the stomach is referred to the epigastric region. What are the other part? So we already told that in intestine, ascending colon, transverse colon, pain will be in the umbilicus because T10 and T11. In the descending colon and sigmoid colon, it will be on the inguinal region or suprapubic region. What about the pelvic cavity? Pelvic cavity is a lumbar and sacral splanchnic nerve forming superior and inferior hypogastric plexus. So here to summarize, I want to present two types of referred pain. Remember, I already told you the questions which are asked usually referred pain. I told you that a patient has come with vomiting, fever, okay, a young adult girl, right lower pain. Pain is referred to umbilicus. Why pain referred to umbilicus? So referred pain, pain carrying fiber of appendix goes to lesser splanchnic nerve. Lesser splanchnic nerve come from T10. T10 also supply umbilicus, so referred pain is umbilicus. So this is one type of pain which is generated from the visceral peritoneum. The same thing about the stomach, same thing about the colon also. What is the second type? The second type is not due to visceral peritoneum. Example, cholecystitis. In the cholecystitis, when gallbladder is inflamed, you get pain over the right shoulder. You get pain over the right shoulder. The reason being that parietal peritoneum overlying gallbladder get inflamed, and then it stretches the diaphragm. Diaphragm is supplied by phrenic nerve. Phrenic nerve, the value is C3, C4, C5. The same C3, C4, there is another nerve which is called supraclavicular nerve. Supraclavicular nerve, same C3, C4. And this supraclavicular nerve supply tip of the right shoulder. So because of that, gallbladder pain is referred to the tip of the right shoulder. So what is the difference? The previous scenario, what I told about previously, these are all visceral peritoneum. But in this case, what I am talking about, referred pain of gallbladder, it is parietal peritoneum, stretching over the diaphragm. So you should go through also Essential Clinical Anatomy by Keith Moore, and particularly focus on hepatorenal pouch of Morrison. If there is a clinical based question, that collection of fluid, blood supply is very important, particularly for superior mesenteric, all branches, and clinical part of superior mesenteric for MCQ questions. Okay, thank you. You please evaluate the lecture. Do you have any questions, students? Do you have any questions?
Doctor, I posted a question in the chat.
Yeah, appendices epilois is also called omental appendices, correct?
Okay.
Okay, so suppose you are asked in SEQ that how do you find appendix during surgery? How do you trace appendix during surgery? What structure you trace to reach appendix?
The tinea coli.
Tinea coli, correct. Good. So tinea coli you follow from any part of the colon and go towards the ascending colon and lower part of ascending colon, then cecum. The last part of where the tinea, all the three tinea coli end, there you can easily reach appendix. Thank you.